Yeah, the reason we bring up the Three Eye Atlas in this show, even though it's a breaking ancient news show, is
Yes.
because a lot of us, me specifically, I don't want to speak for the rest of the guys here, but I do subscribe to the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. And I think that there's a lot of the ancient symbolism, potentially Serpent Mound,
Yeah.
that is, a reconstruction or an imagery of this potential asteroid or comet impact that happened and triggered the Younger Dryas period. So that's why we like to bring up this Three Eye Atlas, because this is something that potentially has happened before that actually caused a lot of this controversy and caused a lot of this the destruction that happened. And we know with the Younger Dryas period there was a dramatic decrease in Arctic ice and a sharp drop in temperature for that 1,000-year period. So something catastrophic happened then, and something that required a tremendous amount of energy. Where does that energy come from? Doesn't happen out of thin air. But anyways, Dave, why don't you tell us a little bit about this article here, because this ties in right with the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, Graham Hancock and all this stuff that's been going on.
Yeah, and I meant to say that too. So I appreciate you connecting those dots. We talk about Three Eye Atlas because it's older than the entire solar system, right? And our ancients were connected to the celestial bodies that pass through, and they paid very close attention to this stuff. So it just all connects, especially with the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. But this was a very interesting article. I believe the dude's name was Chris Moore. Chris Moore. Graham Hancock published it on there. The main themes were pseudo skepticism versus true skepticism, distinguishing rigorous evidence-based inquiry from rhetorical tactics like ad hominem attacks, guilt by association, which I see all the time, unsubstantiated labels of pseudoscience, and we're talking in particular to critiquing Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. And this is where I mentioned earlier, we have 150 plus peer-reviewed papers supporting Younger Dryas impact hypothesis or comet hypothesis or airburst, if you combine them all, right? Proving that 12,300 years ago, climate shifts happened, fires, extinctions, all kinds of stuff. There's so much evidence; it's overwhelming. So it's basically, the article is a call for ethical science, advocates for formal peer-reviewed rebuttals over derision, critiques, premature refutation, which I think is huge. It's like, okay, here's something that goes against. So let's just prematurely call this guy an asshole because he dug something up that proves what I think is wrong. Is crazy.
Seems to happen a lot.
Yeah, and then it also claims and urges debate in scientific forums. So the question I have for you guys and for the chat is, how can the scientific community better distinguish pseudo-skepticism from, which is important, general critique, and what safeguards could prevent rhetorical dismissal from just cutting in, just dismissing hypotheses like Younger Dryas impact? I mean, it's like, how can you just do that? It seems so crazy to me at this point. So what do we do about it?
Yeah,
Sam, you first.
I was going to say, let's have the one that's actually had some experience in the academia field to take a field at this question.
I mean, it's just I for them broadly as a field to distinguish between like what would essentially be grifting and lying and what is legitimately legitimate criticisms and people that are legitimately interested in the content and believe what they're talking about, that would be changing the way that archaeology as a field makes judgments about other people's motives, because that's really what that question is asking, is how do we figure out the motive of what someone's doing, and not necessarily the motive. I mean, it's downstream from that, but it's like, somebody can be schizophrenic and very, very convinced that, and not be grifting at all, and legitimately believe that people came from Jupiter. But the field of archaeology and its members are not good at discerning that. And in my experience, at least the ones I talk to online, which I would argue is not the way the general field actually feels. And that is seen in the way that, Graham Hancock's show had many archaeologists on it. No one ever seems to talk about that, but there were a bunch of PhD archaeologists that went on his show. So it's not like the field broadly thinks that. It's more of an online presence.
Yes.
They have to. It's communication. You're asking people that never stopped going to school, who finished high school. Most of them got their bachelor's, went to their master's, went to PhD. Some of them had a gap somewhere where they worked, but most of them never stopped going to school. And It's an emotional intelligence issue, frankly.
And would you say there's a direct relation between a high IQ and a low social IQ?
I don't know. I'm sure that is actually something that you could just check. So I don't know.
I would say not necessarily, but probably.
Yeah. I say there's a solution to this problem, and I've brought it up before, and it's, just come on a tour with me and do ayahuasca, because, we will get rid of that ego. All these archaeologists will get rid of that ego. We will show you the true version of yourself, and then you can detach your personality and your identity from these ideas, because that's what we need to do. Yeah, that hubris, that ego, that arrogance that people have. But it's also, that's that human aspect of, just like you mentioned, Sam, these people have spent their entire lives in this field and in school, in the education process of this. Their existence, like what they do in and out every single day, is this thing. Then you have these people that say what you're doing and you're the basis for what you're running your career, your life, is built on fallacies. That's what Graham Hancock is saying. And so there's a very, very big negative defensive reaction to that I understand the human aspect of. But it's still just take your time, take it in peace, analyze the information objectively, and then, come to conclusions based on that. And that's what we have, people have a hard time doing, it seems like.
I think they are doing that because the field only takes certain types of information, right? And there's also bias, of course, but they're not going to listen to certain arguments that Graham makes. Some of them are arguments about they just dismiss it. But a lot of it is that they're not going to take Graham Hancock's argument about about the relation to the sky, the relation to constellations, that's inherent in a lot of these structures, because that's not a type of evidence that the field uses. Most of them, archaeoastronomy is still a very new subfield that's largely rejected.
A good one, though.
Maybe not largely rejected, but it's a newer field that doesn't have the same level of subfield that doesn't have the same level. So it's they're not capable. They're trained to do this, and they're not trained to view certain types of evidence as evidence. They just won't consider it.
Fascinating.
Which makes sense, by the way. It's okay for a field to have constraints like that. They have to have constraints, but it's not okay when they have a monopoly over understanding our entire human past. And they should be honest what they are, with pros and cons. Yeah,
there does need to be a little finesse in science. It can't be rigid, otherwise it's not scientific. They have to be constantly open to being disproved.
Right. And they do change their minds. It's just a matter of how flexible they are.
Well, it's when they embody what they believe to the point it becomes almost a religion, that it becomes problematic. They can, if you're making a personal relationship with those belief systems, that's a problem. It's not science at that point. So I do think a lot of the preemptive shutting down that they do, a lot of the guilty by association. Yeah, exactly. It's
late racist
anti-scientific. Yeah, and that's lazy.
That's the worst
I
stuff,
hate even acknowledging that in 2025 because it's so lazy. Yeah. I need you to do better. I need you to insult me in more entertaining ways than old hat shit from pre-2020. So I do think there is a lot of problem of them marrying themselves to their certain beliefs, and that becomes anti-scientific at that point. So
That is awesome. Thanks for those points. We're gonna try to kick along here, but Cody, that it provides an excellent segue into your next subject here with Luke Caverns, because
Yeah.
into that separation of living in the physical. That's something that that humans were doing here on the Earth, and I think you've got a few clips here about Luke Caverns talking about that as well, right?
Yeah,